happy Friday, everybody. And as we're going through the presentation, if you have any questions, comments, anything that you would like to add to this discussion that we will have today, please feel free to raise your hand, um, and I can unmute your microphone so we can all chat. All right, so getting started, today we will be talking about ABA support for families. So we're talking about navigating autism together. So we're going to start off talking a little bit more about social skills. So what are social skills? Um, how can we kind of break down that concept? So social skills are any skill facilitating interaction and communication with at least one other person. Social rules and relations are created, communicated, and changed in verbal and nonverbal ways. And social skills are when you adapt behavior effectively in appropriate situations. So, for example, um, you might tell a child to say, I'm sorry to another child, whereas you might tell an adult to apologize, right, to another adult. So we're kind of changing our behavior to fit the appropriate social context. So social learning emerges at 6 months. So starting at about 6 months of age, you'll start noticing that a child might start scanning their environment and noticing the movements of other people. Between 9 and 12 months, that's when we kind of start to figure out that adults have different motives and different emotions. From 13 to 15 months, you might see children begin to share motives with others. So you might see them start to work together with adults in order to reach a certain goal. And it is important to remember that toddlers regulate their behavior to avoid making adults angry. So children start using gestures as a form of nonverbal communication, and they might check in with an adult, make eye contact with an adult to make sure that the adult is paying attention to what the child is saying. Between 2 and 5 years old, children begin to recognize their own emotions and others' emotions. And this is also when we start to see parallel play and pretend play. So, parallel play is essentially when kids might be playing like in close proximity to each other, but they're not necessarily playing like the same game together. They're not playing cooperatively. They might be playing with different toys, or they might be engaged in like kind of their own pretend play routine, but they're not necessarily playing together. Between 4 and 7 years is when we begin to see role reversals with pretend play activities and shared imagination. So that's when we start to see more of the cooperative play begin to develop, um, which would be more of like we're playing together, we're cooperating together in this play routine. And at 6 years, that's when we start to see children might start to become deceptive, right? They might tell lies, they might, engage in that sort of social behavior in order to get things that they want or get things that they need. So when we are talking about social communicators, there are definitely some categories that we are discussing. So starting at level 1, this would be our significantly challenged social communicator. Level 2 is challenged social communicator. Level 3 is emerging social communicator. Level 4 is nuanced challenged social communicator. And level 5 would be neurotypical social communicator. And we'll break these down a little bit more. So when we are talking about significantly challenged social communicators, this is like very basic communication to potentially no form of communication. Um, an individual in this category would require high levels of assistance, um, unlikely to really respond or initiate social attention. And these communicators can be absolutely placed in group settings, but they would require individual attention to participate. Challenge social communicators. So, an individual in this category might exhibit emerging language, right? You might see some like babbling, you might see um, some attempts to engage in communication, be it either verbal or sign language or picture icons. Um, an individual in this category would also demonstrate poor social attention and poor self-awareness. They might have very little literal and focus. Peers, they may not be accommodating to peers, but tend to give adults extra attention. This individual may struggle to learn as part of a group, and they may struggle to understand real versus pretend. Emerging social communicators, an individual in this category may demonstrate some social awareness. They may be able to engage in perspective taking. They may understand a little bit more of theory of mind, which is something that that's a concept we'll get into a little bit later in our presentation. Um, an individual in this category may have academic skills. They may exhibit mild language problems, a weak or shortened attention span, and poor narrative language. So they may not be able to tell you a story or recall, what they did yesterday or how their day was at school. And a large group of children fall into this category. And then we have our nuanced social communicators. These individuals have good language skills, but may have poor peer play skills. They understand that others have feelings, but don't necessarily understand why that matters to them or how it might apply to them as an individual. And they can discuss how one should react in certain situations, but may have a hard time actually acting in that appropriate way during that situation. And then we have our neurotypical social communicator. So this individual in their communication style might lack a little bit of tact. You might see this individual as, not having a filter, right? Like whatever thought comes up is what might come out. Um, there may be some random comments or maybe sharing a little bit too much information. And it's important to remember that, when we're teaching our children, specifically socially challenged students, they may not be necessarily acting out from like a behavioral standpoint. They may just be engaging in the behavior that they're engaging with because they're just truly lacking that social knowledge. So we don't want to jump to conclusions and implement behavior plans to decrease behaviors, especially not right away. Um, there are things that we can do to support our kids to learn those social skills, to respond to social cues, um, and teach them the background knowledge of appropriate versus inappropriate behaviors. So before we move on, I just wanted to check in with the group and see if there's anyone who would like to make a comment, any questions, anything they would like to share with the group. Yes, Latoya, I see your hand up.
Hello?
Hi.
Oh yes, hi. I was trying to get on. Did y'all ask? Is it okay if I ask the question about how ocean is progressing?
Well, so I am not your child's BCBA, so
Okay.
I wouldn't be able to answer like specific questions related
Okay.
to like programming with your child. But if you have any more like general type of questions, I'd be more than happy to assist you with that if I can.
Oh no, I just want to sit here and learn some information on whatever I can learn on.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
okay, no, that's wonderful. Yeah, and if you have specific questions, like we were saying, definitely reach out to your kiddo's BCBA, and they should be able to provide you with that information.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Latoya. Yeah, here, I see your hand up.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
How are you? So
Good, how are you?
good. So for the inappropriate behaviors,
Hmm.
when they're starting to become more often in school and at home, but you're noticing it more at home and you're implementing all of these things, what is the next step?
So I would need like probably a little bit more information about the behaviors in question that you're talking about.
Okay, so my son, he's like having a little bit of issues in school since September. So his new thing is now like yelling constantly or like throwing things, which he's never done. But now they're becoming more and more frequent, and it's he's never done it at home and he's doing it at home now. And it could be necessarily like me talking to someone else in my house. Like for instance, if I'm telling my son like go do your homework, my other son, like he'll take it as I'm talking to him and he'll start with his tantrums. So we do the breathing exercises, we do the counting, we do the stretching, the jumping.
Mhm.
And none of that is like seemed to be working with him because even his BCBA witnessed, I think the day before yesterday, and they were even saying like, this is new because he's never done this before.
Okay, yeah, I see. So he's starting to like engage in new behaviors.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would definitely be um a more a question more specific to your child's BCBA. Like I said, like I unfortunately don't provide treatment or programming for your child. So
No,
there's
I know, but I'm saying, are there any other strategies to use, like to utilize, like to calm them down, like when they're going through the tantrum? Because that tantrum was like for 45 minutes straight, and I've never seen him like that.
No, I understand. I mean, and that's definitely that's not something that we want to see. But I'm just not able to necessarily answer that question for you without knowing, more details um, about your son and his programming.
Hmm.
But I really would encourage you to reach out to his BCBA directly, because those do sound like concerning changes, and she should be able to support you.
Okay.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right, so we will move along to talking more about like treatments. So these are teaching strategies, things that we can do to support our kiddos in learning those social skills. So one of the kind of foundational skills that kiddos need to learn when we are working on social skills is joint attention. So that joint attention is shared focus of two individuals on an object. So some hallmarks of joint attention might be, eyes are in different directions, gazing at different objects in a small array, gazing around the room, trying to figure out what I'm looking at, and looking at something and internalizing their thoughts about them. So for example, when a mother holds a child's coat, the child's thoughts are, we're going outside. So there are two individuals that are sharing focus on the object, which would be the coat. And then we also want to talk about social self-awareness. So that's kind of a broad category, right? So let's break down self-awareness. So self-awareness involves knowledge and awareness of your own character, personality, feelings, motives, and desires. It's to know who you are, to compare yourself to others. Are you able to walk about strengths? Are you able to talk about your strengths and weaknesses? Are you aware of them? Um, and are you able to look at others and figure out what they need and what they should do? So when we are talking about social and situational awareness, these are two things that really they're kind of woven in together. So situational awareness is being aware of what is happening in the environment and figuring out where you are and what's expected of you. It could include recognizing a change situation in the same setting, so like formal versus carefree. So for example, um, when I am here in my office, my situational awareness is very different than when I am in a therapy room providing therapy for one of my clients. It involves being able to take perspective on yourself and to be aware of how others are perceiving your behavior. So perspective taking, this has come up a couple times in this presentation so far. So this involves viewing a situation from another person's point of view. So I think about you, you think about me, I think about your motives and your intentions. I think about what you might be thinking about, and I monitor my behavior so that I can keep you thinking about me in the way that I want you to think about me. So it's really just describing um, a child's ability to be aware that others are having possibly like different experiences of the same events. It also involves the ability to consider others' thoughts, emotions, physical motives, belief systems, personality, and situational cues. And then let's get a little bit more into theory of mind. So I know we mentioned this earlier in the presentation. Theory of mind is essentially the ability to interpret your own and other people's mental and emotional states. It's understanding that each person has unique motives and perspectives. So this would involve figuring out what people know, think, guess, decide, or maybe forget. And it also involves figuring out how to deceive people of incorrect conceptions. So for example, showing a box to someone and telling them, I went to the store to buy what is inside this box. Do you think I know what is in this box? So here is another example. So this is Anthony. Anthony is reading a book. When he is done, Anthony puts the book on the table. Anthony leaves to get something to eat in the kitchen. Look, Sonia comes in and moves the book from the table to a drawer. Then Sonia leaves. Look, Anthony comes back to read. Where did Anthony put the book? Where is the book now? Where will Anthony look for the book first? So would he look on the table, on the chair, on the desk, or in the dresser? Let's see. Okay, interpreting information. So this is a huge component of social and situational awareness is your ability to make sense of what is going on in the environment based on previous knowledge and then generalizing that to different situations. So this may be focused on details, very literal, not learned, and children must have self-awareness, situational awareness, and proper perspective taking skills in order to interpret information correctly. So here's kind of an example, like looking at this picture, right? So we can see by the facial expressions of the two boys that sure, they're both, walking outside on a sunshiny day. They're walking up the same sidewalk, but both boys are having very different experiences of that same situation, right? So the boy on the left, the boy in blue, looks really happy. He's got his ball, life is good, right? And the boy on the right looks like he might be a little bit angry. He looks unhappy. So that's just kind of an example of how, these two boys might be interpreting the same information from their environment, but they're interpreting it in different manners. So all of these skills together allow us to share space together, play well with others, engage in conversations, empathize emotionally, and speak clearly to other people. And again, those skills that we ran through were self-awareness, situational awareness, perspective taking, theory of mind, and the ability to interpret information. So before we move on, I wanted to check in with the group and see if anyone has any questions, comments, or anything they would like to add. Okay, well, we will move right along. Okay, so talking about eye contact. So, when we are talking about eye contact, it is not just about looking at other people's eyes, it's figuring out what other people's thoughts, emotions, motives, and intentions are. So, when you're making eye contact with someone, you are also letting them know that you are listening and internalizing what they say. And this eye contact is, more of a social norm um, in many of our environments, and it would be expected in a lot of situations that we might encounter. So, thinking with your eyes, right? So, we can show interest in other people by using our eyes to make proper eye contact. We use our eyes to problem solve. We track how others respond to what we're saying within a conversation, a lot of the time by making eye contact with them. Our eyes also help us make smart guesses versus more like wacky guesses, right? So if we're looking at this apple and we want to guess how many seeds are in the apple, we can use our eyes to judge the size of the apple. Um, and a smart guess, using using our eyes, if we're thinking with our eyes, would be 6 seeds, whereas a wacky guess would be looking at this apple and thinking there might be 1,000 seeds in it. Making smart guesses helps us to figure out the hidden social rules, right? So, hidden rules, we're referring to unspoken social rules. So, for example, how we stand in an elevator, right? And it's kind of an unspoken social rule. We're not going to stand super close to each other, unless we have to, unless it's like a really packed elevator. But usually, if you get in an elevator with just one other person, you typically stand, on opposite sides of the elevator as that person, similar to how we stand in line, or where we might sit in a pizza store, right? If you walk in to a pizza place and there's only one table with a family sitting there, you're probably not going to choose to sit at the table right next to that family, right? You might choose to sit at a table further away from them. So again, these are not explicit rules that have been like written out and told to us. They are more of those hidden, unspoken social rules. So moving into expected versus unexpected behavior. So unexpected behavior would be thinking with your eyes, and that would mean having appropriate behavior based on the situation that you're in. An unexpected behavior would be having inappropriate behavior based on the situation that you're in. And what's important to remember here is that different behaviors might be appropriate in different contexts. So, for example, the little boy here on the right, he's kind of climbing over his desk. He's got a big smile on his face. He looks like he might be causing a little bit of a stir. But that behavior, that type of behavior might be appropriate on the playground, right? It might be appropriate on a play structure. It might be appropriate outside, but it's not appropriate situationally for the classroom. And then we can also talk about comfortable thoughts versus uncomfortable thoughts. But actually, before we get there, I did just want to check in with the group again and see if there's anything that anyone would like to add, any questions or comments, or anything they would like to share. Latoya, I see your hand up. Oh, okay, maybe an accident. Okay, well, with that, then we will keep it moving. So comfortable thoughts versus uncomfortable thoughts. So let's talk about a social behavior map. So what is it? A social behavior map is a treatment-based framework that teaches the domino effect of social behavior and behavioral responses. So every behavior affects how people feel, it affects how they respond, which then in turn affects how you feel. So you know, these are all things that are really interwoven together and one influences the next. So social behavior mapping, here is just an example. So this has expected and unexpected behaviors. So let's say we are talking about, let's say the situation would be lunch in the cafeteria, right? A lot of our kids go to school, they have lunch in the cafeteria. So if we're looking at the expected social behavior mapping, my behavior that is expected in this situation might include sitting in my seat, using a quiet tone of voice, staying in my area, and maybe like keeping my area clean, right? So I'm not playing with my food, I'm not throwing my food, I'm keeping my area neat and tidy. So how others would feel about that behavior, they would probably feel good about it, right? They would probably feel pretty positively about that. So then how would others treat me based on how they feel about my behavior? So if others are feeling positive and happy about the way that I'm behaving, they're probably going to treat me in a positive and happy way. And then how will I feel based on how I'm being treated in that situation? If others are treating me well, then I might feel, right? I'm going to feel happy. I'm going to feel positive. So same thing, but looking at unexpected behavior. So again, with the situation being lunch in the cafeteria, right? So an unexpected behavior might be throwing my food, right? Or yelling in the cafeteria. How would others feel about my behavior? Well, they might be uncomfortable, right? I might be, hurting their ears. They might have, some of my food on them that makes them upset. And then how would others treat me based on feeling that way about my behavior? Well, they're probably not going to treat me in a super positive way, right? And then how would I feel based on how I'm being treated in that situation? Well, if others aren't showing kindness to me, I'm probably going to be upset. I might be hurt. My feelings might be hurt by that. So again, this just kind of shows the connection that your behavior influences the way that others feel about your behavior, which then influences how others will respond to me about that behavior, which then influences how I feel I'm being treated in that situation. So another example, the behavior would be standing in line for the gym. So my expected behavior to stand in line at the gym would be to stand in line with my hands down. How people feel about that, they might feel good, they could feel calm, they feel okay. And then how do they treat me based on how they're feeling? They might treat me nicely or pleasantly. And then how would I feel about how I'm being treated? Well, I might feel great. I could feel included. I'm feeling happy. So if I am engaging in unexpected behavior while standing in line for the gym, if I'm standing in line and pushing people, right? How will people feel? They might feel hurt, upset. They might not like me. How would they treat me based on how they feel? They may not want to stand next to me in line. And then how would I feel about how I'm being treated? I might feel angry or unhappy. So the four steps of communication. So these involve thinking about where you are and who you want to talk to, establishing a physical presence, using your eyes to think about others, and understanding how language relates to other people. And also using your language to relate to others. So let's remember there are, again, no rules for our social world. We have to take what we know and what we learn and adapt to it in new environments and new situations.